I felt nerdily excited when I saw that the road to Emmaus was in the lectionary for this week, and also a bit hesitant too, or hesitant as my kids keep on correcting me. Both of those feelings, excited and hesitant, because it really is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, which means I'm also a little wary about wearing it out. It has so many great elements to it, the road to Emmaus. Lots of hooks to grab you. How they didn't recognize Jesus at first, which just makes you wonder who this person was they were talking to for so long. And then how it was communion that got them to recognize Christ. Like, was it the wine? Or how he broke the bread, or what? And then he just disappears. Is that other dude still there? And just his Christ-likeness is gone? Or is it just nothing but thin air? The road to Emmaus story also feels like a bit of a different genre. Luke's gospel is mostly about Jesus. But here we're moving into new territory after all that, a kind of segue into the sequel to Luke, the book of Acts. The main characters here aren't Jesus, but these two guys belonging to the group of disciples, Cleopas, who we don't hear about anywhere else, and his companion. And it's the story of their journey, their road trip, and what they encounter along the way. When I think about road trips, it's usually driving somewhere. First to mind is our many road trips out to Manitoba, when I was young, to visit family out there. And these are pretty nice memories. We had a station wagon for most of those, and my brother would sit in the back section, which wasn't a seat, just an open space, without any seatbelts or anything. This is before seatbelt laws made everything safer, or at least made insurance companies less exposed. I do wonder if anything that leads to an increase in driving actually makes our communities safer, even seatbelts. This was also before devices, so I would spend most of the trip just staring out the window, sometimes focusing on what was outside, flying by, but mostly just lost in daydreaming, scrolling through the random stimuli of my imagination. I don't remember anything all that eventful happening during those trips, apart from giggling fits and being hangry and singing this one song, "A Ship Came from China All Laden with Tea," singing it through each time one note higher until we were just squeaking high above anything that sounded like a melody. My poor parents. One time, a deer hit our car. It hit our car, and it must have been one of those daydreaming times because it hit right under my window while I was staring out, and I didn't see anything. I suppose we might have had more encounters, maybe even the kind of encounter that changes the quality of a trip or even its destination, if we had been on foot, like Cleopas and his companion, though to be fair, they were only walking 7 miles, which is like from here to Laurel Creek. But even so, if they'd been in a car, they for sure would have driven right past that guy on the road. Ian McGregor spoke last week, and he was talking about salvation arcs, this typical structure shared by wisdom stories going all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. This got me thinking of the road trip to Emmaus as a kind of example of the archetypal hero's journey, which is something that Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell talk about. A narrative plot or plot line that a lot of stories and myths share, where an individual or two people, or even 3 or 4, like in The Hobbit or Stand By Me, they set out on a journey or road trip, something that gets the heroes out of their routine, everyday lives, and once they're on this trip, they encounter a supernatural guide. This is often a fairy godmother or wizard who initially seems to be a part of this world, but whose supernatural powers or wisdom eventually become evident as they guide the heroes onward. There's also usually a cave or something like a whale's belly, some dark place where they have to face their fears or just give up. But then they come out of that experience transformed themselves and with some kind of a boon, a treasure or insight that they eventually bring back home with them as a benefit to the community. Now, only so much can happen in 7 miles, and we don't get all these caves and things on the road to Emmaus. But there are a couple of touch points. The road trip itself, of course, a destination that gets them out of their usual routine. There is the encounter with the supernatural guide, who in this case is Jesus. And there's even a boon for the community that comes out of that encounter, which I feel is implied in the sharing of communion. Let's hold that thought for a moment, because I just want to make sure everyone here has heard the news about J.D. Vance, politician, tech bro, and devout Roman Catholic, since he converted in, let me check my notes here, in 2019, explaining to the Pope how to do theology. I think it's very, very important, Vance said this week, for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. If you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. This came after the Pope reacted to some of the religious rhetoric coming from the White House, stating that, quote, God does not bless any conflict. Anyone who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, is never on the side of those who once wielded the sword and today drop bombs. Military action will not create space for freedom or times of peace, which comes only from the patient promotion of coexistence and dialogue among peoples. End quote. I think I read that in the Schleidheim Confession somewhere. Thank goodness there are ceasefires in place now. Ceasefires? The one between the US, Israel, and Iran, set to hold at least till this coming Wednesday, and the one with Lebanon set to last until the 26th. May those both hold strong and well past their deadlines. Even better, may there be diplomacy towards something permanent. And even better than that, may there be the encounter with one another in dialogue that Pope Leo and others feel is the only way to build lasting peace. Maybe this absurd and horrible conflict can in some way be blessed to bring about a deeper and stronger encounter between cultures and between religions. Kind of like that earthquake in Iran back in 1990 in Manjil Rudbar, which killed around 50,000 people. MCC initially sent a 4-person delegation to the site, and they arranged some aid and reconstruction support in cooperation with the Iranian Red Crescent Society. But, and I quote, "It soon became clear that both sides were interested in relating at another level, one where differences and similarities of faith and culture could be discussed," end quote. Some student exchanges were set up, and eventually there were something like 7 conferences of Shia, Muslim, and Mennonite Christian dialogue, which brought my dad to Tehran twice, I think, and I believe there were others in this congregation involved in those as well. Bryce Balmer told me that he's never seen so many police at Conrad Grable as when the conference was held there. There was even a sniper on the roof. In the postscript to the proceedings of the 3rd conference, Darrell Bryant of blessed memory shares this, in words that sound a lot like Pope Leo. "It is always risky to meet, since preconceptions might be overturned, stereotypes shattered, and fears altered. Everyone will be changed by the encounter. It seems to me that they," meaning the Mennonite and Shia participants, "have discovered something vitally important to our global community, that peace in the human family begins with a hand outstretched in welcome to one another and with a word that acknowledges the dignity of all." I didn't get to join my dad in Iran, but I did get to know some of the visiting students a bit, and I had my own pretty special experience with some Persian students when I was doing my master's in Toronto in medieval Islamic philosophy. One of my courses was on medieval Persian mystical poetry, focused mainly on the poetry of Rumi. And one thing I remember is that I wrote my final paper on a section of Rumi's Mathnavi called "The Sufi in the Garden," where he talks about, you don't have to remember this, about the heart of the saint as a mirror of the universe, which in turn is a mirror of God. So there's a mirror of a mirror or something. And I spent a long time explaining what that meant, only to have my professor tell me that actually it's a mirror of a mirror of a mirror. So I had missed one. I still think of that as the coolest feedback I've ever received. Something else I remember is that the 4 Persian students in that class spent most of the time talking not about Rumi, but about Ibn Arabi, this 12th century mystic philosopher whom I'd never heard of before. But I guess they could sense how enthusiastic I was getting, because on the last day of class, out of nowhere, those students gifted me with this book. They had pooled together their money to buy for me, called The Sufi Path of Knowledge, Ibn al-Arabi's Metaphysics of Imagination. I was very moved by that, surprised and moved, and I miss those guys. Now, I wish I had time to get into some of Ibn Arabi's thinking, but to move toward our passage in the Quran, I'll just mention that Ibn Arabi describes an encounter he once had with what he explains as his assigned angel. He was on a boat once off of Tunisia with a really bad stomachache when he saw this figure walking towards him on the water in the light of a full moon. And he knew that this figure walking towards him was the mysterious green man of Islamic lore named Khidr, or Khadir. Apologies for my pronunciation. This is the figure mentioned in the surah we heard this morning. And thank you so much, Jehan, for reading that for us. The story of Khidr reminds me a lot of the road to Emmaus. You have these two companions, in this case, Moses and his servant, identified in the lore as Joshua, and they are also on a road trip. Moses has been told that he'll meet a wise messenger of God somewhere where the two seas meet. And we can think about this as a physical place. There's been speculation that it's the Suez Canal or Isthmus. But when Carl Jung talks about this story, he interprets it as a kind of spiritual quest, the two seas being the inner and outer worlds, or the sea above and the sea below, heaven and earth. And as Moses and Joshua go along, they have this salted fish that manages to escape and return back to the water. This resurrected fish certainly already brings to mind imagery about Jesus. So they return to the spot where the fish escaped, and in its place, they find one of God's servants, which the lore identifies as Khidr, who is either a saint or a prophet or an angel or all of these. Khidr warns Moses that he won't have the patience to learn from him. But eventually he allows Moses to accompany him as long as he doesn't ask too many questions. And that's when the story just gets great, because Khidr starts doing all these really weird things. First, they board a ship, and Khidr takes an auger and makes a hole in the ship. And Moses is like, "What are you doing? You're going to drown these people." Khidr already starts getting frustrated and reminds him he shouldn't be asking questions. So their journey continues, and eventually they come across this boy, a young boy, and Khidr just kills him out of nowhere, crushing his skull. Moses is like, "How could you just go and kill this innocent boy?" And Khidr says, "I thought you promised not to ask any questions." Moses apologizes and swears he won't question him again. So they continue on and come to a town where they ask for food. But everyone in this town denies them hospitality. At this point, Khidr finds a wall that's about to collapse, and he repairs it. Moses, of course, is like, "What are you doing? At least you could charge them for your labor." And at that point, Khidr has had enough and says that they have to go their separate ways. But thankfully, he does condescend first to explain his actions. He had put the hole in the boat because there was a king seizing all fully intact ships for his army. And this would keep it out of the king's hands if there was a little bit of damage to it. The boy he killed because he was destined to grow up and become a monster and terrorize his parents and bring all sorts of others into sin. And as for the wall, there was a treasure buried beneath this wall that belonged to two helpless orphans, and it would have been stolen if the wall had collapsed. So Khidr repairs it so it would last just long enough for the orphans to come of age and claim their inheritance. It's such a wonderful story, and you can see how there's some overlap with the Emmaus story. The two companions on a road trip, their encounter with a supernatural guide who at first criticizes them for being foolish or impatient, but then explains these mysteries to them. In Khidr's case, the mysteries of his own actions. In Jesus' case, the mysteries of scriptural prophecies. And then finally, their abrupt departure. There are other parallels too, including how Jesus and Khidr are both still considered to be alive in some way, still appearing to others on their travels. My time is up here, but I just wanted to bring these Christian and Islamic stories together into some kind of encounter, into dialogue, as a small symbol of the kind of dialogue and encounter we need to be pursuing in these violent times. It's not easy stepping out of our routines, our comfort zones, and journeying with others, especially of a different culture or religion. We risk looking foolish. We will very likely experience things that we don't understand. And as Darrell Bryant said, we will very likely be changed ourselves by the encounter. But that is how the boon of peace and communion is built. And as our children's story reminded us, life is meant for growth and change. Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.